Now, here's where the story takes a bad twist. At first, the Indians were friendly. Well, Columbus, all right, I must tell you, that to get his crew, Queen Isabella could not get anyone to agree to go with Columbus except for a bunch of jailbirds, convicts. It was not Europe's best. And she'd say, if you go with Columbus, I'll commute your sentence, or I'll set you free after you get back. And at the helm of the Santa Maria one night, Columbus had an 11-year-old boy. Again, this was what he could get for a crew. And this 11-year-old boy approached a place on the island where the two seas met. He couldn't control the ship, and it ran and dashed itself to pieces on the rocks, which meant Columbus could not get all his crew back home. The sailors all survived, but they managed to climb to get on the island of Hispaniola. We know that today it's Hispaniola. But only 2 ships were left. Well, Columbus wanted to carry some Indians back with him, so he took about 7 or 8 Indians with him, got them on board the 2 remaining ships, but he told a bunch of his crew people, you wait here and I'll come back for you. So these crewmen built a fort and waited. Columbus went back home showing the gold that these Indians wore. I mean, he showed off some gold. And the Indians looked like strange people to the Spanish. But sure enough, this time Columbus had no trouble finding a crew. 17 ships went on a second voyage. And here's where the story took an ugly turn. When they got back to the island of Hispaniola, they found the fort destroyed and all the Europeans who had been left behind were killed. We don't know what happened, folk. It's hard to tell from this vantage point 500 years later, but this set the stage for 400 years of fights between European and Indian that led to the destruction of the Indians. There is a story, one of my pupils did a paper, and he believed that the Carib, the cannibals from the Carib area of South America, came up, saw these Europeans and killed them all. Others say the Europeans became hungry and felt like they had to take food from the Indians by force, and they began raping the Indian women and killing, whatever the story, whatever the case. The Europeans went on a killing rampage. And by the time it was over with, 90% of the Indians were killed. This was, like I say, whose fault was it? We don't really know. I want to deal with the topic a little bit. Here's what you have. You have people on 2 different sides of the same ocean. It's believed that your population of Europe and the population of North America were about equal. Now again, it's hard to tell this, but most of the population of the New World were living in what is today Mexico, and that's strange because today most of the population of North America lives in what's today the United States and southern Canada. But in those days, they lived in Mexico, and what is today the United States and southern Canada was not very well populated. But you have 2 people, equal in population, living on opposite sides of the Atlantic. They were unequal in culture. Inevitably, they were going to meet. Inevitably, they were going to meet. And what was going to happen when they met? The one was going to be absorbed by the other. I'm not saying the killing was justified, but what I am trying to say, folk, is you run into certain types of people and conflict is inevitable. Did Europeans try to make peace? Yeah, just ask William Penn. William Penn set up a colony in Pennsylvania where he said, we're not going to live on any land until the Indians, it's their land, we're going to pay for it. Good price. And he told you, if you have a grievance, come to our courts. Told him, you're welcome to send your children to our schools. You're welcome to marry with us. You're welcome to go to our churches. And white man and Indian lived side by side for several generations. Inevitably, the differences became more than could be handled, and the white man, the Indians wound up kidnapping a bunch of white children The white men moved in with their armies and drove all the Indians that William Penn had made peace with out. Today, there are no Indians in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of people in Pennsylvania who claim to be descended from Indians. I mean, I went to school with a boy who said, I'm part Indian. He was as white as I am, if not whiter. He may have been, because there were a lot of them, but as far as full-blooded Indians, there aren't any. Canada, they had a better record. I mean, they tried to live at peace with the Indians. What happened? White man and Indian lived side by side for a while, but eventually the whites married Indian girls, the Indian married white women, and then their descendants will almost always marry whites because that was the main number. After a while, the Indians, all the ones who were full-blooded Indians died out, and all that was left was mostly whites with a few mixed, swallowed up like a pill. Throughout the semester, we'll be talking more about people who, times when you have to associate with people whom you really can't get along with. And first is to come to mind is when Roosevelt was, our President Roosevelt was forced into a friendship with Stalin. You may have heard Joseph Stalin was one of the most evil men who ever lived. Well, what's it like? I mean, he was forced into the friendship. I mean, I can understand. I mean, why he'd be friends? Stalin was buddy-buddies with Hitler. Then all of a sudden, Hitler turned on Stalin. And Roosevelt decided to help Stalin as being the lesser of two evils. I mean, I couldn't say as I blame him. So what kind of friend was Stalin? He was always complaining, Mr. Roosevelt, you're not doing enough. We're carrying too much of the war. Here we were fighting their war in Japan. We were fighting their war in North Africa. But you don't have a front opened in the West. Then when we opened the front finally in France, you're not moving fast enough. And then when we finally, the two of us together, us and Stalin won the war, Stalin responded by taking over a third of Europe and saying, well, we thought this is what you let us do. You know, putting a third of Europe behind the Iron Curtain. Have you ever associated with a person like that? If not, you might before your life is over. When you're forced into a friendship that will not otherwise work, that can't possibly work. A person who doesn't have your morals and values. Basically, this is what happened when the white man met the Indian. What could have been done differently? Well, to say that Europeans should have stayed home, well, hey, that could only have happened if Europe would have been united under one ruler, which was not the case. Now, if you had lived back then, if you had not come to America, your cousins would have. Or your brother or sister from some of them would have, if you hadn't. The idea that we could have kept all the Europeans out, away from the gold that we found in America, and away from the wealth that was to be made, I mean, the idea that we could have kept them out, Volk is unreal. What could have been done differently? Personally, I think nothing. In my personal life, I've had to associate with people 3 times that I can think of that did not have my values. Once as a kid, I mean, all right, I want to tell you, I grew up in poverty. No, I'm not the least bit embarrassed about that. I'm not ashamed of it. I grew up in poverty. In fact, the first time I taught this class, I had the students write a paper about poverty, 3-page paper. I'm going to let you pick your topic. Anyway, and that I grew up in a tough neighborhood, and try as you might, I couldn't get along with the boys in that neighborhood. They were different from me, did not have my values. Number 2 was when I was a young man teaching in a public schools. Yes, I taught for 5 years in public schools. And as is the case of most school teachers, my children never saw the inside of a public school. I homeschooled them. One of them graduated from college last May with honor. The other one is now to University of Georgia Junior and heading for a graduation with honor. And the third one is also being homeschooled. I believe he can do well in college if he decides to go. Homeschoolers are now known to do better in most academic subjects than their public school counterparts. Anyway, my second experience with dealing with them, I have to call them bad people for lack of this in the public schools, for that I was in trouble far more than I was out of it. I taught for 5 years, and some of you may have some idea, well, I'll tell you why. I took out a loan to get through, and my pupils tell me this law is still in the books. If you teach for 5 years, you get half your college loan forgiven. I taught for 5 years and quit. I got half my college loan forgiven. Then spent 27 years at Lockheed after that. And then part-time here. My original goal was to do what I'm doing now. It took a long time. My third, no, I gotta quit here. My third experience was as a single man dealing with in my late 30s, dealing with single women who were in their late 20s, early 30s. I gotta quit here. No, I gotta quit. I mean, hey. Anyway, but I think I know what it's like. Europeans trying to associate with American Indians and folk, I don't know who drew the initial blood. We'll never know that. But the fight was to last 400 years and end with the Indians being thoroughly defeated. Was it right? Perhaps not. Was there another solution? I've spent years trying to think of one. We've had discussions in my class about it. I don't know. What could have been done differently? Probably nothing. It was a case of if you didn't get to them, they were going to get to you. And if you had been a settler in this country, you had 3 choices. Go back to Europe, drop dead, or fight. Or my ancestors chose to fight. All right. Anyway, Columbus altogether was to make 4 voyages. This painting you see, you don't have a book, but on page 399 is a very famous painting of Columbus landing on the island of San Salvador, which we now know to be an island of the Bahamas. It has been said that Columbus died in poverty. Now, this book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, will tell you that Columbus had in his possession a map that actually showed the North and South American continents, which is known to have been on the maps of Europe long before Columbus, and that he might have known that he was not going to head for the New World when he came. I mean, he was not going to head for China when he came over. The standard view, though, is that he miscalculated the size of the Earth by 15,000 miles. Pardon me, by 10,000. He said the Earth was only 15,000 miles around in circumference, when actually it's more like it's 25,000 miles. If it hadn't been for the North and South American continents, Columbus and his entire crew would have perished from hunger and thirst. And don't ask why couldn't they drink the water from the ocean. Ocean water cannot be drunk. There are a few exceptions. We've found a few places in the ocean now where there's fresh water, but you have to know where it is. Ocean water, and well, why couldn't he fish? You can't catch fish in the middle of the ocean. Some of you may have heard this, which I've heard from the time I was a child. Fish will bite, or they can form and school on the ocean's on the edge. In the middle of the ocean, dried up. Can't catch fish. You can't carry enough food, or they couldn't carry enough food to last the 10,000-mile voyage to China. They would have perished. But anyway, Columbus is given credit. Now, in 1992, there was a big interest in Columbus. Some people say he was the biggest mass murderer in all of history. I don't think he meant to be. I think his problems were forced on him. All right. After Columbus, we talked about the conquistadors. They were mostly, again, upper-class individuals motivated by greed, glory, and even some religious crusading zeal. And there were the explorers. Your book doesn't emphasize much about the explorers I want. I mean, some explorers, De Soto's found, you study them more in American history. De Soto was the first white man to see Georgia. And of course, there was Ponce de Leon, who looked for the Fountain of Youth and never found it. They were looking for the 7 cities, Cibola, golden, glistening cities. There was a movie made about that a few years back, and one of them was found over the Dakotas. It's pure fantasy, maybe. Anyway, but the Indians convinced the Europeans there were such cities. But we're leaving that, though. While your book does emphasize a couple of conquerors, Cortez